Can't even drive the company truck 12 feet on the weekend? Okay. This is my husband's story from a few years ago. He was an equipment salesman and had a company pickup that he brought home at night and on weekends. His company did not allow personal use aside from driving it to and from work. Some salesmen took advantage of having a pickup and did use it for personal use, and the company installed GPS systems on all company vehicles at the first of the year. My husband was pretty miffed as he really hadn't misused his truck, but he figured he had nothing to hide, so he shrugged it off. In February, he had to attend a trade show on a Saturday. This triggered the GPS and he would got a nasty call from his boss who was located in another state. My husband had to provide documentation that he was attending a company-sanctioned event. He felt like he was being babysat. This happened a couple other times as well. One Saturday that spring, he backed the truck out of the garage and onto the driveway to get the lawnmower out. After he finished mowing, he pulled it back into the garage. Yup, you guessed it, this triggered the GPS twice, and on Monday, his boss called him and chewed him out. My husband tried to explain, but Lou was mad. You know you are not to drive the company truck on the weekend. I was moving it out of the garage so I could get my mower out. Does your report show how far each trip was? They were 0.0025 miles each. He paused as he seemed to realize how short of a distance these trips were. But, well, that doesn't matter. No driving after hours or on the weekends. This is being noted in your file. So on the weekends he either parked on the street or in the driveway. A few weeks later, his compliance became malicious. We lived in the Midwest where thunderstorms, tornadoes, and hailstorms are not uncommon. We were under a storm advisory with a strong probability of hail. Should you move your truck into the garage? I asked my husband. You'd think so, but today is a Sunday and I am forbidden from driving my truck even a few feet, so it's going to stay where it is, he said. As the hail came down, about the size of a quarter, he stood looking out the window at the truck grinning. He loved explaining the damage to his boss and reminding him why the truck was no longer parked in a nice, safe garage. Edited to add, when he reported the damage, he reminded his boss that it was a shame he wasn't allowed to move the truck into his garage when he became aware that a storm was coming. The boss knew dang well he had maliciously followed the policy. The policy was relaxed/reworded a few weeks later. Not sure if it was a direct result of this.
Now to the comments. Yeah. I used to hate those stupid GPS emails. Once a week it seems I'd have to explain to the regional manager that my guy was stopped at a red light for 5 minutes, he wasn't just idling the truck for no reason. I did use it once to prove my guy wasn't at the customer's house when it was broken into, but that's the only time it ever came to good use.
My friend works for ATT as an internet service tech. They red flagged all the bars. One afternoon he had a service call in a local tavern and nearly got fired for spending an hour inside the bar, even though it was ATT that had sent them to service their customer, the bar. Corporate idiocy at its finest.
ATT is peak corporate idiots. I was a mobile IT service engineer for a while, and although it was before GPS, our mileage was monitored. Unfortunately, one of the techs abused their car for personal use, and from then on we weren't allowed to use the car on our own time at all. After getting angrily interrogated about some excess mileage over a weekend, there were major roadworks and my trip to / from home increased by about 5 miles, I decided that the car could just stay at head office from then on. I'd drive to the office, pick up the car and then start work, leaving it there at the end of the day. Management was pissed as they could no longer get me to go straight to a job in the morning, but there was nothing in my contract stating I had to take the car home with me.
The company my dad works for has workers scattered all over the country, so they all keep their vans at home. While it wasn't officially allowed, they always turned a blind eye to the vans being used on the weekends, as long as it wasn't being abused. Anyway, a few years ago the company decided to no longer turn a blind eye and told the workers not to use the vans outside of work hours. My dad said, "That's fine, where should I drop it every evening after work?" They said, "Oh, you can still keep it at home, you just can't use it after work or over the weekends," to which he replied, "No can do, if I can't use the van, I'll have to get a car and I don't have room for the van and the car. You find a secure place for me to park it overnight and over the weekend and I'll just collect it from there every morning." Others in the company said the same thing. Suddenly faced with having to find and pay for secure parking all over the country, the company said forget it and went back to turning a blind eye.
Years ago, at a former employer, we were told to bring our trucks to the shop. They decided to go Big Brother on and put GPS on our trucks. There were 6 of us all together and most objected strenuously. This is when we still at least had the illusion of privacy. The boss swore up and down he didn't have access to the data. It was supposedly just for insurance and theft recovery stuff. Nobody really believed him and lots of snarky comments were made, but things did settle down eventually. About 6 weeks in, he called up a co-worker of mine to chew him out for still being at home several hours after he should have left home. Rather than argue with the boss, he said there was someone there who would like to have a word with him. Then he handed the phone to one of our bigger customers whose site was about 80 miles from the guy's house. After a bit of confusion, the customer confirmed that our guy was there and had been there all morning. Boss outed himself as a liar and still never apologized. "If you think we rode him hard about it before," co-worker never would admit it, but I suspect he somehow engineered the situation. Apparently the GPS in mine never worked right at my house anyway. That's not surprising. The carrier the company used for everything had next to no coverage at my house. I also parked it under a metal roof. At the time, the GPS receiver, an old Motorola phone with no service, that I used for my laptop wouldn't work under there. No idea if that did anything or not, but I like to think it did. The GPS thing lasted for only a few months before they told us to take part of it out and drop them off at the shop. Not long after we were finally issued company cell phones, that they swore totally did not have GPS on them. They did. But that's a story for another day though.
Story 2.0 please.
Story 2.0 isn't as much fun, but here goes. There was a lot of back and forth about the new phones. Most of us had been getting money toward our personal phones, so that was just gone. All of us had higher minute packages than we would otherwise have signed up for, so we were going to get stiffed for the extra for a while. Anyway, the new phones came and they repeatedly assured us that there was no GPS tracking, etc. That lasted until my truck broke down about a year later. It just sputtered and died going down the highway in the middle of nowhere. There was no shoulder to speak of, but I spotted a newish subdivision nearby and managed to coast into it. I called my dispatcher to let him know what was going on. He asked for the address so they could get the fleet company we used to send a tow truck. I'd been preoccupied with getting a big ungainly work truck off the road without power steering, so I'd not noticed the name of the street. The street wasn't even showing up on my redneck GPS setup. I hopped out of the van and started back toward the highway to get the name of the road when the dispatcher said, "Hold please." I'm sure he meant to put me on hold, but didn't hit the button hard enough or something. I heard him explaining the situation to someone else in the office and then he rattled off an address. Sure enough, it was right about where my truck had coasted to a stop. When he came back on the line, I called him on it. There was an awkward silence and he just ignored me. When I pushed, he tried to gaslight me, but I wasn't having it. Of course, I wasn't all that surprised at being lied to by that bunch, but I was more than a little irritated. I called a co-worker to vent a bit. He mentioned it to someone else who then told someone else, so on and so forth. By the end of the day, it had gone through our small group and had spread to a couple of neighboring branches in other states. Apparently, it was common knowledge company-wide. Not long after that, nothing much happened, but a lot of people were upset at being lied to. It came up any time we had a conference call or training class for a while, especially when the company promised something we know they weren't really going to do. Unfortunately, you know a company doesn't trust you when they have intense GPS monitoring. Our GPS monitors would notify the boss when you were speeding. We had little hatchbacks, not really capable of doing more than about 160 km/h at a push. I got a call one day. "Boss, GPS says you're doing 190 km/h. Me, well, that's not even possible. Do you think this call is even necessary, boss? Yeah, true.
They can be a saving grace though. The company I used to work for as a technician had them but never actually monitored them. One time my buddy was driving, and a lady complained that he and I were blowing through the neighborhood. The boss looked it up and we were going something like 33 in a 30 zone. Boss laughed it off and told us to cool our jets. Another time a colleague was reported specifically as speeding along a street at a specific intersection, except the GPS showed he had never even been on that street that day. I came to the conclusion that those richer neighborhoods just didn't like all the pool service vehicles going around, despite loving when we were there to fix their pool, or the cleaners were rolling up to vacuum.
Worked as a tech once and had my own truck and had one co-worker with me. Was driving to a job site in a remote town once and the boss called once. Asked where are we going? I didn't understand the question since it was obvious, we were going to the first job site. I asked what he meant and he said he are pretty far north. I said on our list the first stop is X town. He went oh that's right, and that was the end of that. I wondered what he meant because it seemed so strange, but then I realized the highway we are on it far north enough that basically nothing is ahead except the border and that small town. So with a quick glance at the map it must have looked like we took the truck and all the equipment and were making a run for the border. LMAO. They had GPS on our trucks but speeding was never an issue, at least not for me. Why would I speed to a job site where I have to do a lot of heavy lifting when I can just drive 5 under to prolong paid driving time? It also extended by day and thus overtime, and as a college student on break I milked the duck out of overtime. What's even better is my boss knew my driving reports were always good, so he put me on all the farthest routes, so I was literally getting time and half for driving, sometimes hours at a time, to maybe only 3 sites while everyone else was doing twice the stops a day.